Section 4. You will hear a university lecturer giving a talk about the life and property of the author Charles Dickens. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Good morning, everyone. Today we are continuing our series on 19th century literary giants by looking at the life of Charles Dickens. While you may know his famous works like Oliver Twist, we are going to focus specifically on how his physical environment and personal struggles shaped his output and his estate. Dickens was born in 1812, and while his early years were relatively comfortable, his family's stability was fragile. His father, John Dickens, was a clerk who lived notoriously beyond his means. In 1824, the family's situation collapsed. John was arrested, not for a crime of violence, but for debt, resulting in the entire family, except Charles, being sent to the Marshalsea debtors' prison. This left the young Charles alone to fend for himself. He was pulled out of school, a humiliation that haunted him for life, and sent to work at Warren's blacking warehouse. His job wasn't manufacturing the polish itself, but rather the monotonous task of adhering labels to the pots of blacking fluid. The misery of this experience became a recurring motif in his fiction. Moving on to his writing career, Dickens was not merely an entertainer, he was a fierce social critic. While many of his contemporaries focused on the romance of the countryside, Dickens was obsessed with the city. He championed the poor and was particularly vocal about the inadequate education available to impoverished youth, believing that ignorance was the root of crime. Furthermore, he broke literary convention by describing the pollution of industrial London in visceral detail, the fog, the mud, and the smoke, using the environment as a character in itself. In his later years, Dickens became a celebrity performer. He undertook grueling tours where he would read enactments of his books to packed halls. These tours were made possible by the rapid development of railways, which allowed him to crisscross the country at speeds previously unimaginable. However, the schedule was punishing. The intensity of performing the murder scenes from Oliver Twist night after night left him in a state of nervous exhaustion. While he suffered from gout and kidney issues, it was severe insomnia that plagued his final years, often driving him to walk the streets of London all night. Let's turn now to his sanctuary, Gad's Hill Place in Kent. This was a house Dickens had admired as a boy, and he was eventually wealthy enough to purchase it. He made significant alterations to the estate. One of the most curious additions was a structure in the garden. It wasn't a traditional English gazebo, but rather a Swiss chalet, which had been gifted to him by a friend and shipped over in pieces to be reassembled. He found it the perfect quiet place to write during the summer months. However, the property had a major flaw. A public turnpike road ran straight through the middle of it, separating the house from the garden. Dickens found the noise distracting and the crossing dangerous. He initially applied to have the road diverted, but when that was rejected, he decided to build a tunnel underneath the road to bypass the traffic. This allowed him to access his writing chalet in peace. Inside the house, Dickens's eccentricity was also on display. In his study, he wanted the room to feel enveloped by literature. He famously had the door and parts of the wall covered with mirrors. Wait, let me correct that. Actually, that was a feature of his London home. At Gad's Hill, he created dummy books, fake book spines glued onto the door, to make the library appear unbroken and continuous. Finally, regarding his legacy today, while we have his published books, researchers are increasingly interested in the papers he left behind. The Victoria and Albert Museum holds a vast collection of his manuscripts. These handwritten drafts are covered in chaotic scribbles, crossings out, and ink blots, offering a fascinating window into his frantic and perfectionist creative process.